Well, welcome back. I hope you were well. As always, it's a pleasure to have you join me again. Today, I am going to be taking a tangential discussion to what I have been talking about over the past few days. In the prior session yesterday, I talked about how relationships are supposed to be simple and how they can be easy if you understand how to make them work. And I went as far as explaining that human beings are easy. We're not supposed to be complicated animals. We become complicated based on our ignorance about how to associate, collaborate, communicate, and be with other people. Now, today I'm going to talk about something that I think applies to any part of your life, not just relationships. However, I'm going to bring it all the way full circle back to relationships, and not specifically relationships that have to do with, eros. I'm going to talk about filial, and I'm going to talk about all the forms that relationships present themselves in. Now, let me start with a concept that I think you might understand. In life, what we have to agree as a basis, almost like a principle, is that something we have can be used to obtain something we want. It's the concept of exchange, the principle of mutual exchange. Again, I mentioned this briefly in the previous sessions, that there's something you have, and you can exchange what you have for something you want. There is also something you have that you can sow, invest, with the hope that you get what you want. There is also something you have that you can happily and freely give away. Now, to understand that concept, let me talk about business. Let's assume that I started a business and I had £10. And let's assume that this particular business was going to be, let's say, selling lemonades. If I were to take my £10 and leave that £10 in a bank account, then I would say that my total equity value, or my total assets in the business, is £10. But remember, I am hoping and I am intending to grow the business. So I take my £10 and I go out to the market and I buy some lemonades, and I buy some sugar, and I buy some syrup, and I buy some cups. Let's assume I spend the entire £10, and I, just by sheer luck, will be positioning my lemonade stand by my front door. I have a place I can use. I don't need a stall, and I don't need any furniture. I can simply place my lemonade once prepared and sell it. The moment I actually exchange my £10 for ingredients, and the moment I have those ingredients in my hand, suddenly what I had in my account, £10, identified as assets, is converted to another type of asset we call inventory. So the inventory will state that I have inventory worth £10 at the time of exchange, and at the time that that statement or financial statement is prepared. Now, with that inventory, I can then prepare my lemonades and I can exchange it for more money. And let's assume I do it properly and I make a return of say 12%. That would mean that if I was able to successfully sell all of my lemonade, in addition to getting back my £10, I would also get 12% as my return on invested capital. Inventory is an important terminology that we all need to keep in mind with relationship, with business, with life. You and I have been given gifts. We have an inventory that is associated with who we are. When we are born with nothing, and I'm talking about the general population. Now, there are some of us, and there are some people who perhaps are born into something more than nothing, whether that be a two-parent family, or whether that be a loving two-parent family, or whether that be wealth or some form of inheritance. But generally speaking, most people come into the world with nothing. You don't bring anything into the world. You come just as you are. But at the point when you were born, there is an inventory placed inside of you. And those inventory, or that inventory, has items that you can exchange for whatever you want. The first inventory item that you've been given, the first gift, is time. We are given it freely every 24 hours. All things remaining equal. Nobody gets 25, nobody gets 27. We all get 24 hours. All things remaining equal. So time is the first ingredient that we have. And here is how it works. You exchange your time for anything you want. So if you want to be a doctor, you have to exchange your time for study. You learn, you study, you practice, you rehearse, and then hopefully eventually you take an exam and you pass, and someday you become a doctor. But you had to give something in exchange. Now, there is money to be spent, I grant you that. But the first thing you have to give is your time. You give time in exchange for money. You give time in exchange for a relationship. You give time in exchange to solve a problem. You give time whenever you want something else that is out there. Now, the reason I started today's session with the example is to say, it doesn't matter what area of life, where you're hoping to achieve a dream or a goal, you have what you need to get what you want. It then becomes a question about whether you understand how to use the inventory you have and to sow that inventory, or to invest that inventory, or to give away that inventory in order to obtain something in return. Time is the first inventory. The second inventory is your presence. Your presence. Here is why your presence matters. As a young child, a baby's presence has the effect of actually bringing together everyone in the space. You can see a mother who is a black mother with a black child walks into a supermarket, and it doesn't matter the race or the ethnicity of the people around her, each and every one of them would reach out just to hold the baby, just to kiss the baby, just to touch the baby. Why? The baby's presence. It draws people to her. It draws people to him. Your presence plays a huge role as an inventory. Now, as you start to grow, the person you develop into becoming, and therefore what I call your self-image, determines how your presence is received. Now, for some people, and I hate to say this, but some people, by choice, by omission or commission, have lived a life such that when they walk into a place or space, their presence repels people who would normally be drawn to them. Now, there are other people who have so mastered the art of proximity, the art of attention, the art of an environment, that when they walk into a space or a place, they draw people to them. Therefore, if you are not getting what you want out of life, there are one of two reasons. Number one, you haven't invested your time for what you want. If there is something that you do not have in your life, the outcome, which shows the absence of what you want, is evidence that you have refused to invest the amount of time needed to be able to acquire said skills, said attitude, understanding, wisdom, and therefore results. Number 2, you've also failed to use your presence properly. Finally, number 3, in terms of inventory, is your mouth. Your mouth is a powerful gift you have been given. The tongue, the ancient writers say that the tongue is like an unruly horse. It needs to be restrained. When you see a horse that has been trained properly, it's a beauty to behold. When you see a horse that is not trained, you want to stay away from that horse. Our mouth is so powerful that a baby cries, and it doesn't matter who is around, whether that is the parents or the guardians or just strangers. It breaks our heart to hear a baby cry. People run hoping to soothe that baby. A young child calls out for help. Father and mother run to her rescue or his rescue. A young woman says the right words, and a man decides that he will sacrifice his life just to defend her. A woman walks into a business meeting and speaks eloquently, with honor, with charisma, with gentleness, with empathy and humility, and the other people across the table say, "We will work with you to achieve your dreams." Your mouth is important. Your mouth is an inventory that you have. Now, when you combine all 3, think about this carefully. A baby is born, they have time. They also have a presence. And the one thing a baby uses from day one is their mouth. They use their mouth to communicate, I need help, I need attention, I need a drink, I need food. Everything is communicated with the mouth. But what comes out of your mouth as you develop is a product of what goes on in your head, in your mind. Your thoughts become flesh when spoken. Words are simply thoughts that have been covered or clothed in a way that we can actually perceive, feel, hear, see them in the physical plane of consciousness. So, your thoughts and your words are connected. Therefore, if your thoughts are not clean and your feelings are not pure, then your words will not be as well. And that would mean that your mouth then becomes a hindrance rather than a blessing. Better to live in the corner of a house than with a quarrelsome wife. With her mouth she builds, and with her mouth she destroys. I've known men who've destroyed business relationships by uttering the wrong words. In a fit of anger and frustration, a relationship that was built for years, sacrifices made for years, is burned to the ground with a few words. Which is why we discipline ourselves and we encourage ourselves to be careful about what we say, especially when our emotions are high. So, let me go back to the 3 things I said. Remember, inventory. You have all of these things, and therefore the results you want from life in any area of your life is hugely dependent on how you choose to use any of these gifts that you have been given. The first is your time. The second, I said, is your presence. And the third is your mouth. I hope it's not philosophical. Let's put it to practice. In the sessions that we looked into yesterday and the day before, I was talking about relationships and how relationships are not supposed to be complicated. They're supposed to be easy. Now, let's use 2 people. I'm going to quickly talk about business, relationships, and other areas of life, community. But watch this. If I were to meet you at the corner of the road, and I came up to you and I introduced myself, and I spoke to you kindly, and I spoke to you with honor, and I spoke to you not with respect. Respect is actually earned. Honor is a gift that I give you because I understand and I recognize your uniqueness to me and from me. But if I spoke to you in a gentle manner, and I asked you a simple question, such as, who are you? What do you do? And I guided you towards a place where I said to you, is there anything I can do to be of some service to you, to help you? Is there a problem I can solve for you? Let's assume you said no, that there was nothing I could solve for you, and I walked away. Something strange will happen. Sometimes not immediately. It could be days, it could be weeks, it could be hours. But in your quiet time, the memory of our interaction will come back to you for a number of reasons. I may have come across as being memorable. The fact that I came up to you and invested my time gave you the gift of my presence, but in that presence was a peaceful demeanor, a joyful state, and more importantly, I used my mouth to inquire as to how I could make your life easy. There's a higher probability that you will remember me, and therefore, not immediately, sometimes it takes years, sometimes it takes months, but a time will come when you will look to reciprocate, to give me back in kind what you received with love. The law of sowing and reaping is a law that people should study. Now that's the first example. Let's call that a business arrangement. In other words, I was looking to solve a problem for you within a business arrangement. We meet. You are a lady, I am a man. We introduce ourselves. During our conversation, you make me aware that perhaps you play hockey at a local pitch, not too far from where you work. Perhaps you also indicate that you're playing for a tournament, and the tournament is at the weekend, and it's an important one. We exchange pleasantries. Let's assume that the conversation was cordial. I walk away, and on the day of the tournament, I show up. I show up to support you. Now, recognize you only just met me a week before, and let's assume that the interaction was peaceful. But the fact that I showed up to support you, sitting there in the crowds, not intruding, but at the end of the tournament, I come up and I say, well, I watched you play, and you play very well. And let's assume you even lost the game. And I joke and I play around and I say, well, there's a possibility that the game could have, and the results could have gone the other way under different circumstances. Assuming I was also friendly, and I left. But I left, and before leaving, I used my mouth to say things that were memorable. Talk about what I observed about the game, particularly how you were unique in playing the game and the contribution you made to the overall mission. And I left. I guarantee you that you will find me memorable. Now, it doesn't matter whether you are already intimately connected with another or whether you are even available. The point is that I took my time, I brought my presence, and I used my mouth. If for some reason we bumped into each other weeks later, you would see me more favorably than you did the first time, primarily because I was willing to invest with no expectation of reciprocity at the start. This is a key thing. The law of sowing and reaping is important because we sow and we hope to reap. The mistake most people make is when we sow, we believe the law of sowing and reaping applies within the same confinements as the soil. So we tend to think if I sow in this particular soil or in this particular person, then I should reap from that person. No. When we sow into what I call the universe, and we reap from the universe. There is a season to sow, there is a season to reap. You can't do both in the same season, and you never get what you sow. You always get much more, or you get less. But most importantly, you never always get from the same soil that you sow. Now, this is where frustrations come in with regards to people. People are always looking for mutual exchange, but that is the basic stages of actually achieving what you want. The next level is actually the level whereby you sow with expectation, but the expectation is not from the person or the people, but it's from the universe. It's from karma, the positive karma that happens in the world. It's from the attraction that you create within yourself. The soil gives you back, but the soil does not give you always from the same location. It comes from somewhere else. Now, the reason I've actually connected these three inventories is simply as follows. Most people are interacting with others without understanding that there are universal laws that dictate our outcomes. And there are universal laws that cannot be broken. They can be bent, but they will straighten themselves out eventually. And one of those laws is the importance of understanding that what you sow, you reap. Sometimes it comes back in good measures. Sometimes it comes back from a different soil. So think about your relationships and whatever you might be looking to achieve. If you understand that from the word go, there are inventories that you have that can enable you achieve whatever you want. Now, let me take it a step further and I'll bring today's session to a close. Everything I have explained will not be yours to experience if you lack the most important word, desire. See, desire is that unexpressed potentiality that is looking to express itself in our environment. Desire is the spirit that comes from the universe. Is something seeking something greater, a passion, an interest, a curiosity, a fascination, something that drives you, an obsession. Without desire, you can't achieve what you want. So a man desires a woman so strongly that he would travel to the ends of the earth to find what he needs, to meet her needs. A woman desires a profession, and she will sacrifice whatever is needed to study, to practice, and to become what she wants to have. Without desire, we fall short of whatever outcomes we want. So if you go back to your inventory and you connect your inventory, recognizing you already have what it takes. You have everything you need within you, and all you have to learn is how to be a good giver and how to be a good exchanger and how to solve problems. But you cannot do that without desire. But here is where I come to perhaps the close of today's session. Let me bring you full circle back to relationships. I'm going to leave you with one thing that I think is so absent these days in the interaction between people. And I believe genuinely that it is perhaps one of the reasons why our lives are much harder than they should be, and our relationships are more strained than necessary. We don't use our mouth in the right way. Remember, our mouth can be used to bless and it can be used to curse. We can use our mouth to speak life, or we can use our mouth to speak death. We can use our mouth to draw life into, and we can use our mouth to draw nothing out of. But let me make it more concrete. One of the correct reasons why you have a mouth is not so that you can speak, it's to aid your ability to hear. Let me say that again. One of the reasons why we have mouths is not so that we speak necessarily, though important. It's more so we draw from the universe, the world, from people. We draw out of them what we need. And we draw from them the solutions we need to achieve our goals. How do we do that? Questions. Questions. Now, in my lifetime, short as it may have been, or long as it may have been, depending on your position of reference, I have almost never met people who have the ability to ask questions. I have been stunned. When I visit people's homes, when I interact with people, I am often fascinated at how very little questions are asked, genuinely asked. Here is a clue. You start with stupid questions, then you transition to normal questions, and then you transition to intelligent questions. But ask. ASK, if we were playing Scrabble, this 3-letter word would not score very highly. But it says, if you ask, you will receive. If you seek, you will find. And if you knock, the doors will be opened up to you. People do not know how to ask because people lack desires and they don't know how to formulate and present questions. The reason, lack of desire, lack of interest. So if there is one thing I can draw to you is learn the art of asking questions. Then learn the science of asking questions. Combine them both and master the craft of asking questions. If you want to be successful in any area of life, health, well-being, your mental state, prosperity, work, your profession, relationships, the quality of the questions you ask will be intrinsically connected to the quality of the results you experience. So you want to start asking questions very early and keep asking questions until you get what you want. One of the byproducts of actually the passion that comes with asking questions is because you become interesting. Now, to be interesting, you have to be interested in people. Imagine we go to a party and everyone generally, the world tends to revolve around us. And for those of us who were raised and who were brought into this beautiful Western world, we live in a slightly narcissistic world these days. Why? Partly because the last 2 generations, especially those raised by the baby boomers, were raised to think about feelings and emotions and the me. So we've been raised to think of ourselves as the center of the world, the solar system, and everything revolves about how we feel, which means it's not unusual to go to events and everybody's talking about themselves. No one is asking questions and no one is interested. And I have found the most interesting person in any social gathering is seldom the person who speaks, but more so the person who asks questions. Why? Because you're memorable. You are remembered. So, if you go to a gathering or you meet people, the more you ask them questions, and not closed-ended questions, but open-ended questions, the more people share about themselves, their dreams, their hopes, their fears, their tribulations, their journeys, their aspirations, their doubts. And as they share that experience, you allow them to crystallize their thought process so that in many ways they're dying to their old self by communicating, and they're being born into their new self. Because sometimes most people keep their thoughts and worries in their minds, but when shared, you release it. Now, here is an important thing to keep in mind. Whatever you name is yours to claim. If you name something, you can control that thing. So, for example, for those who struggle with mental health issues, I take nothing from you. But there is a group of people who will not name it. Now, I have a different philosophy about mental health. But if you don't name it, then you don't acknowledge that it exists, despite you struggling with it. And if you do not name it, then it has control over you, because you have fear over it. But if you name it, you acknowledge it exists. But you also acknowledge that what you are and who you have in you is greater than anything without. Remember, you name it, you bring it out from your internal system. The word becomes flesh, is now in the physical. And the you that is the physical and the spirit within you as the physical is greater than anything else in the world. Which means you master over your problems. So sometimes by asking people questions, you give them the opportunity to transform themselves. So they tend to come to like their road to Damascus moment, where the light shines in them, not by your light, but by the light that comes as a result of that awareness that is brought about by the questions you ask. Questions make you interested. And if you are interested, people will find you interesting. So by asking questions, you almost become the most important person in a space, because each person leaves, and it has to be genuine questions. It has to be with desire, and it has to be from a place of peace and in good faith. People leave thinking, I've never met anybody as interesting as him. And when you ask them why, they say, I don't know. You make them stop and think. You make them answer questions that they may have considered themselves, but were too afraid or never thought about asking. Now, everything I have explained, if you apply these to relationships, business, you will thrive. Relationships, you will be successful. With women, women find men fascinating, irrespective of their backgrounds, when the men have an interest in what and who she is as a woman by questions. You don't presuppose, you don't speculate, you just ask questions. And the more you ask questions, the more she tells you more about herself. And the more she tells you about herself, the more important she feels. And the more important she feels, the more she's drawn to that need from you to ask questions. And when you leave, suddenly she's met someone who made her feel special, not by what he said or she said, but by the questions that were asked. The same thing happens with men. A woman's mouth is the key to her success in relationships. Not your body, not your beauty, not your youth, your mouth. Now think about this carefully, and I'm going to perhaps let me not move into theology. Perhaps it's too complicated for this. But your mouth is so powerful. Let me digress. I'll go back. Let me give you an example of. I know people don't always follow the same position about religion, so I have to be careful about using examples that are not necessarily applicable to most people. But think about this as a story or an allegory or parable or just some fiction. And let me connect it to your mouth. Something you are saying every day is deciding the results you're getting in life. And whether you believe in a transcendental or you don't, whether you believe in a God or you don't, let's pretend you do. Within the Jewish faith and the Christian faith, and even within the Islamic faith, what you say determines what God does. Let me say that again very carefully. And for those who might disagree with me, think again. About 2/3 or half of the Quran are primarily the books called the Torah, the Pentateuch, part of the Old Testament. So there is a connection between three religions: Judaism, Christianity. Judaism is the foundation stone, Christianity is the fulfillment. Christianity is based and founded on the Old Testament. But if you go through the Torah or the Pentateuch, those early books make up or are in the Quran. So you have a consistency in teaching. And if you start from the first book and you journey through, what you find is what you say controls and determines what God does. Now I can give you examples. Abraham. I can give you more examples. Moses. Joshua. And we can keep going. Samson. David. Solomon. What you say determines what God does. Jonah, Nineveh. I'm going to destroy these people. The people acted differently. God stopped his plans. Why? Something you were saying determines what God does. I'm going to wipe out Sodom and Gomorrah. And the questions began. Would you wipe them out if there were 50 righteous people? No. Forgive me for asking, O Lord, you almighty Lord. But what if there are 45 people? Would you still wipe out the entire city? For you, my servant, no. Now that I've been so bold to ask you such questions, forgive me for asking one more time. What if you found 20 good people in the city of Sodom and Gomorrah? Would you still wipe those people? No. And it kept going until 5. Now, the reason I make this example is to say something which I think is important. Whether you are agnostic, whether you're atheist, or whether you believe in something, in this world that we have of flesh and blood, your mouth and what you say, what you see and say determines what happens, what is gifted to you. Some people have vision, but they do not have the ability to see with their minds. The mind of man is the mouth of God, and the mouth of man is the mind of God. What you say determines divine plans and interventions, which is partly why. Now, this should not be hard to understand. I meet a woman and I say to her, I profess to her that I love her. And if I say that long enough, she starts to believe. And suddenly, that belief becomes her reality and my reality. Why? What I say determines what happens in my life. If I have conviction, and I have desire, and I have faith, and I repeat what I believe, it comes into being. Now, this is powerful stuff. Questions are important. You want to be successful in a relationship as a woman? Get skilled at asking the man questions. Now, Solomon is known and considered to be one of the wisest who ever lived. But when the lady, Bathsheba, arrived, recognizing that so many people had come to see Solomon, the account of the story says that she asked him questions. He became interested in her because she had the gift and the ability to ask questions. Now, women, if you study the most seductive women who ever lived, they were not seductive because of their beauty. They were seductive because of the ability to go into a man's heart and mind, feelings and emotions, transcend into his future by the questions they asked. Cleopatra, Marilyn Monroe, questions. It was a subtle, seductive way of making the man feel special. And he would reveal everything. We go back to the stories from the old ancient books. Samson. How did Delilah get all of the information about his strength and power? Questions. Ask questions all the time. Ask genuine questions. Ask with curiosity and passion. Ask in good faith. Ask with a desire. Take the inventory you have, your time, your presence, and your mouth. And if you ask the right questions, obviously beginning with the wrong questions, hence my qualification about good faith and peaceably, that people forgive you if the questions are the wrong questions. But if you come in good faith and with peace, they still answer the question. And as you go from the art of questions to the science of questions to the craft of questions, eventually what you find is that you get so good that people just want you around. Because when you are around, you raise them to a higher place. You make them see in themselves something they never knew existed there prior. Now, I hope that's been useful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session.